Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today on The Artful Entrepreneur. Today I have Giancarlo with Hudson Films. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to hear all about videography and outsourcing and how you got started during the pandemic and all that good stuff.
Glad to be here.
So, you mentioned that you got started during 2020. I heard a lot of people, I guess, starting businesses during the pandemic. So, how did you overcome those challenges basically with everything? I'm sure everything was online.
Sure, I can give you a little backstory on how I actually got to doing that at that exact time. Of course, that's not an ideal time to start a business, right as a pandemic is hitting, but that was the situation I was in, and I'm glad to have made it work. I was actually working a 9 to 5 job prior to that, I had a few 9 to 5 jobs, and it was just not for me. It was not, I didn't like the structure of a 9 to 5 job, taking orders, having to
I don't
show
either.
face. And that's exactly why we're connecting here, because that's the reality of most entrepreneurs is that, they just run a different life and work in a different way that is not often suitable with a 9 to 5 job. And I made the decision that, I can't work a 9 to 5 job anymore because, I was depressed. I was not being fulfilled. So that's why right at the beginning of 2020, I decided to quit my job and go all in on starting this business. And that was actually, funny enough, that was probably about a month before the pandemic hit. So it was definitely a rocky road at first. And I can't say I had a great first year, obviously, because of the pandemic. But the following year after that was a lot better, and because I made it through that, I feel like I can make it through, anything now.
That's true. And I think the first year in business anyway is usually the hardest. So I think during the pandemic, probably that just made it extra hard.
Thankfully, it gave me a lot of time to like learn, the intricacies of, how to set up a business, scale a business. Was I getting a ton of clients? No, but I learned like the groundwork. So I'm
True.
grateful for that.
Okay. So outsourcing to me is an essential part of business growth because we can't do it all. So have you outsourced anything in your own business?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of virtual editors. That's probably, 50% of how I get work done nowadays is through, leveraging virtual editors. Obviously the more like high-end advanced projects that I work on, I'm doing that myself just because, a virtual editor that you're paying, not that much money to only has so many skills. And there are certain things that I've set in place. Like for example, I do one of two things with my business. I do either high end cinematic brand films, or I just do general social media content. So for like the more high end custom brand films, that's something more that I would handle versus the general social media content. That's something I would probably delegate to a virtual editor just to conserve my time. It's not, as a business owner, it's not worth spending numerous hours editing. How we anybody that's created content knows how long it takes to edit a video, and if you want to do it right, it takes a lot of time. So for most of us, it's just
Yeah.
not worth our time. And a major part of running a business is being able to leverage your time and delegate. So that's exactly, what I do for, the more short form, easier content.
Right. So you kind of answered my next question. So you're outsourcing, like how do you decide which tasks to outsource and which to handle in-house? You basically said stuff that goes, in social media is basically handled, are outsourced and then the higher end stuff is handled in-house. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
More or less. I would say, the shorter form pieces of content, like for example, this podcast, I'm going to splice it together afterwards with my virtual editor. And, this is a relatively easy piece of content to, repurpose and edit. So
Yeah.
something like this, would be great for, a virtual editor. And that's something I recommend to everybody that it has a podcast or is creating some sort of interview type of content like this is, hey, hire a virtual editor because, it's probably not worth your time to, be looking through all this and, editing it yourself. But that's something we can talk a little bit more about.
Well, I just had a quick question pop into my head. So we have a lot of AI now for like video editing. I mean, how much do you
Mhm.
rely on AI or recommend it?
So I've definitely done my fair share of research in AI, and there are some fantastic things that you can honestly do with AI. In my opinion, it goes only so far. I think it does a good job to like, edit the video, maybe 50%. And sometimes people are okay with, editing an okay video that has, just like the basics of what you would need for editing. I think it does a great job to get you started. But to take your video to the next level and make it really professional, putting B-roll, just making the video a little bit more custom, I think that you will need a virtual editor for that case. But it really depends what your goals are. If you're looking for, just to pump out content, or if you're looking for something a little bit more professional. If you're looking to just
Okay.
pump out content and you're really not too picky on it, then I think the AI does a great job.
That makes sense, especially since AI is still kind of new at this point. So, what are the benefits and potential drawbacks that you've experienced when you're, outsourcing some of your editing?
So you know, I love virtual editing. I love outsourcing. And like I said, I think it's a great way to leverage your time and delegate work. But, in finding a virtual editor, it's often a challenge. It's something that I've found that is very difficult to do, is finding somebody that's actually reliable, that can speak
Mm.
English, who's a good, editor, who is able to take, criticism and notes. So I've found that it's hard to find somebody like that. And the key is that you really have to, scour Fiverr, scour Upwork, try to contact as many people as possible, because at the end of the day, like anything, it's a numbers game, right? If you match with one editor on Fiverr, chances are, he probably is not going to be that good. Maybe he can do the task, but to actually have somebody, fit into your system and, work hand in hand with them is a different thing. So it's really a numbers game and trying to find that good virtual editor. And, you definitely just can't choose anyone that you find. You really have to see, first of all, if, you know, they can speak English and they have good communication skills. And second of all, if,
Mhm.
I always give my editors a test project right off the bat, just to see if they can do exactly what I'm saying. And, it's definitely a process to finding a good qualified one, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that goes with any business. Like I've watched my friends, they run like brick and mortar businesses and they run into the same thing when you have employees. It's the same thing. They have to have good communication skills, they have to have good attitude, be able to actually be skilled enough to do the work. And, they have to basically align with your brand, where you've got
Hmm.
to find somebody that's willing to, like if I were to hire somebody to edit my photographs, they have to be able to do it in my style. So I'm sure it's the same thing, with your video brand as well.
Exactly. And you say it's kind of like, hiring like a full-time employee. In a way, it's kind of like a test run at hiring, your own full-time employee. If that's something that you want to do down the line. Hiring and managing a virtual editor is a great way to like test out your skills as a manager, right? Because you're not
Mm.
actually spending, 50, 60, $70,000 a year on them and having somebody full-time in-house, but at least gives you the skills to say, hey, like, this is this is how I manage somebody, this is how I delegate somebody, this is how I communicate with my employees, give them incentives. So, it's more or less the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. So, well, I mean, what tips do you have then, like for hiring somebody or looking for somebody?
Sure. And a lot of people ask me this. A lot of people see that I work with a lot of virtual editors, and they're often asking me, hey, how do I secure a good virtual editor for myself? Because, it's an asset to for any business that's creating content, to have a great virtual editor that they can rely on and, pump out content. And that's actually why I started quite recently a virtual editing company that connects businesses with qualified vetted virtual editors. And for a flat monthly fee, we connect you with the editor, and he edits all your short form content to your liking. And we also have a project manager on, every single project, so that you're not constantly managing this virtual editor and telling them exactly what to do. You have this project manager that really, you know, takes that job and, manages the editor essentially for you.
So
So
basically, you
that's
went out and did all the hard stuff. You went and scoured Fiverr and Upwork and hired all these people.
exactly. I scoured it a lot, and I have a team of editors that, I connect different businesses with, and it's been going really great so far.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I was getting tired just listening to you. Like I was like, oh my God, you're right. It's so hard to find somebody. And I actually have
exactly.
hired somebody to do like a very simple like commercial for me or something on Upwork last year. And I went through, I think, like a couple of them, and I wasn't super duper impressed. But then again, I'm not a videographer myself, so
Mm.
you, they're also working with whatever I gave them.
Exactly. I think everybody's, at least every business owner, I think has utilized Fiverr or Upwork to some degree. And what I, like just like you said, I often hear these horror stories of working with, editors that they don't know how to, there's so many different things. They don't know how to speak English, bad communication, they don't edit the project to your liking. And maybe for one project, if you do like a one-time thing, it's great. They do a phenomenal job. But to actually have somebody that is like, working hand in hand with you and that is like in your system is a different story. So, that's exactly why I created what I created.
Awesome. So going back to like we were talking about outsourcing and what do you handle in-house versus outsourcing, how do you determine like the cost effectiveness of, you know, outsourcing tasks? Like, so obviously you're looking at labor, right? Because how many hours is it going to take me when, if I earn $100 an hour and I can outsource this for,
Hmm.
$20 to somebody else? But I mean, is there anything else other than, I don't know, labor to consider?
What do you mean by labor? I mean, I mean, it's
Like,
also my time as well, right?
yeah, like basically I'm looking at my time. Like if I'm a single or solo entrepreneur or small, very small business with a couple of employees, how am I determining what else besides hourly wage, I guess?
And pricing, different videos. Is that your question? Or in delegating these tasks?
Probably pricing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get a little clarity on what you mean. Can you just repeat your question one more time?
So whenever we're looking at outsourcing, there's always a budget to consider, like there's always, how do you determine the cost effectiveness of like outsourcing tasks versus handling them internally? So maybe it's not just related to video editing. Like maybe there's other things in your business that you outsource as well.
Hmm. I mean, I can tell you there's not an exact formula. It's just kind of getting a feel for it. The more you do business, the more you work with clients and, outsource, the more you get a feel of like, this would work or this wouldn't work. So I don't have an exact formula, but at the end of the day, I mean, my hourly rate is significantly higher than, say, a virtual editor from the Philippines hourly rate. So, I mean, more often than not, it's just going to make sense to delegate just because of that.
Right. That makes sense. So if I wanted to start my own videography business, which,
Hmm.
what maybe I would use your company to like outsource some of my video editing. Well,
Sure.
what areas do you think entrepreneurs should focus on first? Like, are there specific tasks or services that are more, suitable for outsourcing in the beginning?
Yeah. Are you saying specifically for a videography business or for just any business in general that wants to?
It could be any business in general.
So you're asking what I think they should focus on first?
Right.
Is that really it?
Yeah.
Well, I think using a videographer definitely has its time and place, and if you want your content to be as professional and as custom as possible, then spend the money on a good videographer to make that happen. But if you're working on a budget and you're just getting started, I don't think hiring a videographer is totally necessary. I think a great start is getting a few basic pieces of equipment. I talk about a lot of this on my page on basic equipment that you can use, your iPhone, a mic, a tripod, simple things like this to get started so that you're not held back by paying a videographer. Like, you can actually create content yourself in your own room. And I think that's a great start. It's just making the content yourself. I talk a lot about using, we were talking about AI before, but a great way to think of content ideas, because that's, a lot of people's problems is, how do I think of all these content ideas, right? Utilizing something like ChatGPT is a great way to come up with content ideas. And then lastly, I mean, hiring a virtual editor. I think that's, whatever route that you choose, I think that's, a great way to get started is by using a virtual editor, because the last thing that you want to do, like I said, is, spend countless hours editing it yourself.
Right. And we're only becoming more and more video driven, as time goes on. So everything is
Exactly.
video now, thanks TikTok.
Mhm.
So, I definitely see the need for your services. So, but how do you, like, when you outsource, how do you basically ensure that, like, let's say I want to hire a videographer, how do I ensure that they align with my brand values and consistency, like with the overall style of,
Sure. I mean, so yeah, a great way to do that is just by having brand guidelines, right? I think every single business should have a set of brand guidelines that they follow. So whenever they do inevitably hire a videographer or virtual editor, these brand guidelines will make sure that all the content is consistent. And now, what do I mean by brand guidelines? Well, there's three things. First of all, logo, right? Second of all, is your font, right? And not having a cheesy font, something that really, defines you and is a little bit more unique. And lastly are your brand colors. So, by giving the editor these brand guidelines, it should be, cohesive with all your other marketing materials.
all right. Awesome. I think those are great tips. If somebody wants to, I mean, I'll put your website in the show notes, but I'm assuming, what is your website if somebody wants to find you online?
So you could find us on Instagram at Hudson __ films. That's two underscores,
Okay.
or at hudsonfilms.co. That's CO.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm sure I will be utilizing your services at some point in the future.
I'm glad to hear. We have a lot more talking to do, Paula.
All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, see ya.
Thank you.